So we spent the last couple screencasts learning about Redux and connecting React and Redux and connecting the React router with Redux. What we're going to do now is start building the backbone for a full stack application. We've done a lot of work on the front end. What we're going to do now is actually start persisting our to-dos using a database and building a node backend. So what I'm going to start with is by making a simple folder, and I'll call that to-dos backend. And I'm going to cd into that folder, and we're going to create a simple node application. I'm going to npm init, and I'll pass in -y so I don't have to fill in all the blanks, and I'll make a file called index.js. And with this node application, we're going to keep it really simple. I'll make a folder for my models as well as for my routes. And I'll install some necessary dependencies. I'm going to install Express, body parser. What else do you think we might need? We're going to need Mongoose. And one more important thing we need to think about is actually cores. And this is a bit of middleware that's going to allow us to make requests that are cross-origin. Remember, this backend is going to be starting on localhost 3001 or 5000, and our front-end application is going to have a different port number. And when there are requests from one domain to another, right off the bat, it's a violation of the same origin policy because those port numbers are different. They might both be localhost, but they're still going to be different ports. So we want to allow requests from different domains to come into our API. And to do that, we're going to use this nice cores module, a little bit of middleware that's going to allow for certain headers to be sent and set to allow for cross-origin requests. So let's get started with this. I also realized there's one more dependency that we're going to add, and this is going to be for a little bit of debugging. That is going to be Morgan. So npm install Morgan, that's going to allow us to see requests that are coming in to our backend. So let's get started with some code. What I'm going to do with my index.js is just go and bring in all of my necessary dependencies. I need Express, so I'm going to require Express. I also want an app variable, so I'm going to invoke the Express function. I also want to bring in cores. So cores is going to be requiring the cores module, and I'm going to do this with Morgan as well. Let's go make sure that we bring in Morgan, and let's go make sure that we bring in two more. We have body parser. Got to make sure I call this body-parser. And there's one more that I'm going to want, which are going to be my routes. So I'm going to call this to-do routes. And to-do routes is going to be the result of bringing in whatever is in routes/to-dos. So in order to get that to work, I need to make sure that I have a file called to-dos.js. So inside of here, I'll make a file called to-dos.js. Inside of my models as well, I'll make a file called to-do.js. I'm just going to have a simple to-do model. So what else do I need inside of here? Well, let's start using some of this middleware. I'm going to use Morgan, and we'll pass in tiny. This is simply going to give me a little bit of logging. I also want to make sure that I use body parser. You might see body parser URL encoded. We want to make sure we're using body parser JSON, since those are the kind of requests that are coming in. We want to make sure that we also use cores. And then we're going to specify that any routes that come in, we'll prefix them with API/to-dos. And that's where we'll include all of our to-do routes. You could see a more complex folder structure with a handlers folder and so on. I'm going to keep things really simple here. I just want a little bit of middleware. So I'm going to say if there is any kind of request that comes in that we don't know about, we'll make a new error. We could say let error be a new error. And we'll say here, not found. This is going to be our simple 404 handler. We'll set the status to be 404, and then we'll simply call next with that error. This is just a little bit of fancy error handling. The next thing we can do, since we're really not worried too much about building this in production, is we'll simply say, let's use another piece of middleware, which is going to catch that error. We'll have a rec, a res, and a next. And inside of here, we're simply going to say that our status is whatever that status is, or a 500. This is very similar to the middleware that you'll generate when using the Express generator or some stuff that you've seen before. I'm just coding this line by line so we can see what's actually happening here. What we'll then do is simply send a error message. We'll pass in an object with a key of message, and that'll be whatever the message is. And then we'll pass in some kind of error, which will be whatever error we get back from our next handler. Finally, let's make sure that we listen. And we can listen on port 3001. Let's keep it real simple. We'll run a function, and when we start listening, we'll say console.log server starting on port 3001. This is not something that we're going to worry about deploying in production, so we're really just going to start with a simple development server. So this looks like a pretty good index.js, but we're not going to get very far if we don't have our routes, and we're not going to get very far if we don't have any kind of database persistence. So we are going to bring in Mongoose. This is going to be our ODM that's going to wrap Mongo and allow us to quickly store information, save information, and retrieve it. We're going to connect to a very simple database. We'll call that MongoDB:// and we'll call this to-dos backend. Let's save that. Let's make sure that we pass in debug of true so we can see the Mongo queries being executed for debugging, and we'll make sure that we use ES2015 promises by setting mongoose.promise to be the promise library that is built in to Node. What we'll then do is make a quick schema, and that's going to be a new mongoose schema, which accepts an object, and all we're going to have is a task. That's it. Our task is going to be a string. The next thing we do is create a model from that schema. Mongoose.model. What do we call it? To do. And what schema creates it? The to do schema. The last thing we're going to do is just export out this to do model. So all we want to do in our model here is bring in Mongoose, connect to it, log any Mongo queries for debugging, and make sure that we're using ES2015 promises. We then are going to build a very simple schema where all our to-dos will just have a task. Finally, we'll make a model and then export out that model. That looks pretty good. How about our routes? Well, here we need to think about the kind of routes that we need in this application. So first off, we got to bring in Express. And when we bring in Express, we'll require that. And what are we using with Express? We're going to use the Express router. Finally, we're going to bring in our to-do model so that we make sure that we go back a folder and grab that to-do model for any kind of database interaction. Let's just make sure right off the bat that we export out that router. And here we really only need 3 routes. We're going to have a GET request to /. Remember, everything is prefixed with API/todos. So we're going to go to router.get/. When that happens, we'll run a function with rec, res, and next. And inside of here, we'll simply find all of our to-dos and then run a function with those to-dos. And we'll just respond by sending all of those to-dos. If something goes wrong, we'll get some kind of error, and we'll just call next with our error. That looks pretty good. This is simply going to go get all of our to-dos. This is the route or our index route to grab all of the to-dos. What about creating a new to-do? Well, that's not a get, that's a post. And when that comes in, we will create with whatever comes in rec.body. Now, this is not the most secure. This is just a simple application. This will give us some kind of to-do. And here we could even send a status of 201, which is created, and then we'll send that to-do that we just made. If things go wrong, we'll send that to the error handler. The last thing we want to do right now is simply just make a route to delete to-dos. And when we go to /API/todos/SumID, we're going to use the very handy find by ID and remove. And what are we going to remove? We're going to remove whatever comes in as this ID right here. We get that in rec.params in Express. And then we're simply going to send that to-do that we've deleted. Next thing we're going to do is simply just send that to the error handler. So how do we know if this is working? A really good way is first to make sure that we can start this server. So we're going to run nodemon, and it looks like we're starting this, and it's telling us use Mongo client to connect. I'm not too worried about that. You can take a look at that deprecation. We're just really building something very simple right now. What we want to do is test our API. So in a separate terminal window, we could start making curl requests, but I'm going to use a pretty friendly library called HTTPy. And HTTPy is a modern command line HTTP client. You can scroll down a little bit and see how to install it. It's quite easy. You can use brew, and I'll show you how to use it. So we're going to start by making a request to HTTP, and we're going to get localhost 3001/API/todos. And what we can see right now is we get these nice headers, and then we see a simple array of what we get back. Now, if we want to see if we can create these, let's HTTP, but we're going to post to localhost 3001/API/todos, and we're going to pass in a task of eat. Let's go try that out. And we can see back in our server that we're actually running that insert. This right here is coming from our debug true. We can see the Mongo query. This post right here is coming from Morgan. So it's really nice to make sure that we're doing that correctly. Let's go try to add another one. HTTP. We're going to post to localhost 3001/API/todos with the task of code. Let's go try that out, and we can see we get back this new to-do that we made. If we want to see all of our to-dos, remember the route for that, http get localhost 3001/API/to-dos. Let's go check that out, and there we go. There are the to-dos that we have. How about deleting one? Well, we need to delete by the ID. So I'm going to grab this ID, and I'm going to run http delete localhost 3001. What's the endpoint again? API to-dos sum ID. Let's go take a look at what this looks like when we delete. We can see we're running find and modify, we're passing in the ID, and it looks like we've removed this one successfully. Just to triple check that, we can make sure that when we get all of our to-dos, we just have one remaining. So it looks like our backend's actually in pretty good shape. We can run these 3 requests. We're just testing from the command line. You could use Postman, you could use curl. I'm using httpy. That's the wonderful module that you can brew install httpy, and you can use it right away. It's a much cleaner way of worrying about passing in headers and stringifying information. It's a really nice way to work with things. Unfortunately, we're not really going to be using httpy to work with our application. What we need to do next is connect React, the router, and Redux with this backend that we built. We're going to start a server on 3000, which is going to be our Create React app, and we're going to modify information on a server with 3001. So we're going to have to introduce communication between our Create React app and our Node backend, and that's what we'll do in the next video. But before we stop, let's go take a quick look at the code that we've written here. We've started by bringing in some dependencies. Express, CORS, remember what CORS is, cross-origin resource sharing. This allows us to make a request to localhost 3001 from localhost 3000, which is going to be our Create React app. Remember, these ports are different. So by default, the same origin policy, which is a security policy on the web, says that we cannot make those requests because we don't want to write any kind of malicious JavaScript on another domain. But since we're using CORS, we enable cross-origin requests. We enable AJAX requests to be made to this backend. If we don't have that CORS request, we're going to get a big error around the same origin policy. We brought in Morgan for some server-side logging, body parser, so when we make post requests, we can grab rec.body, and then we brought in our to-do routes. We use this middleware, and we prefix all of our routes with /API/to-dos. We have a little bit of logic related to error handling. In our routes, we have 3 endpoints. Localhost 3001/API/to-dos, get all the to-dos, a post to that same route to create a to-do, and then the final one to delete a to-do by its ID. We're using these nice mongoose methods that we have. Those mongoose methods come from our mongoose model right here, which has a schema which simply contains a task. We're going to keep it real simple right now. So try to code this backend as well. Make some requests using curl or using Postman or httpy, however you're comfortable with that. And the next screencast, we'll put it all together, build a full stack application with some React, some Redux, and discuss how asynchronous actions can be triggered in Redux using a library called Redux Thunk. See you in the next screencast.